intertwined with planning, achieved its most gruesome effects in the century, but it has endured into the still colonial present as well. In the second half of the 19th century, urban planning acquired a new form, as city leaders in Halifax began to introduce a set of techniques, forms of knowledge, and objectives that they described as modern. This newer, modern form of planning tended to be concerned less with securing physical territory than with producing and regulating physical conditions in such a way that human life was protected and improved. Whereas Halifax's first planners sought to establish a territory that could be controlled and administered by the colonial state, an exemplary modern planning initiative would seek to, quote, protect the physical and moral health of city residents, make the city a, quote, more agreeable place to live in, or, quote, improve the general welfare of the population. The pursuit of such objectives from the late 19th century onward reworked and rearranged the ground of colonized territory. Significant planning initiatives in 20th century Halifax included the development of sewer and water systems, the establishment of building codes and property development regulations, the demolition of impoverished slums, and the redesign of the city's public spaces. And these and other interventions, the remaking of physical spaces through planning, was meant to act upon individuals and populations, to protect and improve people's lives according to period-specific conceptions of human well-being and flourishing. The arrival of these new planning initiatives was accompanied by new and complex forms of subjugation. As I explained in the book, modern planning's attention to human flourishing has gone hand in hand with various forms of physical displacement, political exclusion, sanctioned exposure to dangerous living conditions, imposed impediments to good health or welfare, and enforced restrictions on people's mobility and daily activities. In some cases, negative effects like these are traceable to the exemption of certain lives from the sphere of planning's concerns. The terrain of life that planning seeks to safeguard simply does not extend this far. In other cases, negative effects are more intimately connected to the operation of modern planning. Here, it is exactly through targeted degradation and subjugation that planning seeks to promote a better form of life, either for the broader population or sometimes for the adversely affected residents themselves. In all cases, the lines between lives improved and lives degraded is written most clearly and enforceably in the font of race. From the late 19th century to the present, evolving conceptions of race have shaped the meaning of the human life that planning has sought to secure and nurture. The city's Black residents experience modern planning as an unyielding source of imperilment and plunder. These residents, who have numbered between 8,000, like Halifax. Modern urban planning, my book argues, is formed by particular entanglements with race and power. The power of modern planning is expressed less in the creation of sovereign territory than in the creation of material conditions that act upon individuals and populations. The creation through spatial means of tangible improvements in human health, happiness, and well-being. The paradox of modern planning is that these seemingly benevolent aims are structured by evolving conceptions of what it means to be human. Many social groups have thus found themselves expelled from the conception of human life that planning is sought to secure and nurture at a given point in time. And yet, life's pathological outside has been defined and populated most enduringly by the city's Black residents, and a deep-seated structure of anti-Blackness has shaped planning's dealings with all city residents, Black and non-Black. This structure, this configuration of racial power, is the focus of my book. The book traces the connections between planning, power, and race across world history in Halifax, seeking to unpack both constants and variations in the operation of planning. Each chapter documents the emergence and consequences of a particular planning vision or project. The book, while it attends to diverse and not always racial forms of subjugation, advances the argument that anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism, is fundamental to the way that modern planning works. The moves of modern planning, its attempts to create a life-improving urban terrain, are rendered imaginable and achievable by the displacement of Blackness. This displacement is sometimes physical displacement from the land, and sometimes symbolic, displacement from the field of planning's concerns. Displacing Blackness, physically and symbolically, is the unending work of modern planning. So that's a little bit from the introduction. So we'll sort of expand on that a little bit and connect it to a couple of the three major aims of the book. Before I go any further, though, I want to recognize the particular social conditions in which this event occurs. And particularly, we can begin with the conditions that allowed me to write a book. And so my ability to write a book as a white author are shaped by a variety of racial privileges that are actually deeply connected to the forms of racism that I critique in the book. And they're also made possible by a long line of intellectual work by Black scholars, work that enables me to do the analysis that I do in the book. And so it draws on all these Black intellectuals. And by intellectuals, I just mean people who think critically about the world. Some of these Black intellectuals have had university positions and research grants, but others have worked in incredibly challenging conditions, including plantations, prisons, housing projects. And so they haven't had the support available to them when they're doing the work that I had available to me. And so this book rests on the courageous work of others. The major thing that the book does is to connect this long line of intellectual and political work to the planning archive, and therefore to put a little bit more evidence behind Black intellectual and political claims. And so as we proceed, I hope that this long line of work remains in the foreground, and the talk acts as an invitation, if not a prodding, to engage with this line of work and think about what it means for your life in the present. Aside from my ability to write a book, there's the question of what allows the book to be read, and to be read as credible. And here again, the system of power that I'm analyzing in the book also shapes the reception of the book. And so I want to quote Elle Jones here, who wrote last week, quote, "For Black women, no matter how many facts and studies or how much expertise you may have, white people will still dismiss your work as not credible, while not even bothering to read the studies that completely back up multiple times everything you say," end quote. And so I want to recognize these inequalities in how people are heard, and these inequalities in how people are seen as potential knowledge makers. And then I guess I would say that if you came tonight to hear me speak, I hope that you'll listen extra hard to the Black people and other people of color who I speak tonight, and that you'll also come out to events where African Nova Scotian people or other people of color, Indigenous people, are the only speakers, because that's where knowledge is really being made. So the book has three major aims. The first aim, as I suggested in the introduction, is to try to specify what exactly racial oppression is versus other forms of oppression, and to connect that oppression, racial oppression, to the core of the way that planning operates. And existing discussions of planning often fail to do this. It's not that these discussions don't notice that planning often harms people of color. That would be really hard not to notice. The problem arises when we try to explain why that occurs. The usual explanation is that communities of color are more likely to be poor, and therefore they're likely to lack the resources or political power to fight off harmful planning projects. And this isn't entirely wrong, but it does translate a position in a racial hierarchy into a class position. It translates it into just poverty. And so racism exists in this analysis. It's assumed to exist in the labor market, in the education system, etc. That racism is what confines people to a lower class position. But it imagines that planning itself isn't racist. That planning is just a reflex of racism's operation elsewhere. And so planning is this unique realm where planning isn't present. And so I think we need to do better than that. And so one of the questions that I try to pursue in the book is how can we write and think about planning in a way that recognizes the distinct effects of racism on its operation? How can we think of racism as something ingrained and deeply rooted, as something that shapes planning in the continual and profound ways that we know capitalism shapes planning, or that developers shape planning, or that campaign contributions shape planning? Now these questions are opened up for me not just by a critical reading of the planning literature or attending planning discussions, but rather by a long line of Black social and political thought in Halifax and around the world. And so close to home, I think these questions are opened up very elegantly by the Beachville-born African Nova Scotian poet, historian, and filmmaker Sylvia Hamilton. Sylvia Hamilton, in her poem Melville Island, writes, quote, "Coming from the fields one day to find we've been up and sold, we invented temporary," end quote. So this passage, this description of forced geographical temporariness, raises questions for me about the way that ideas about racial Blackness during the time of slavery shaped the spatial regulation of their lives, and maybe how those conceptions of racial blackness continued into the present with important effects. Black people in Hamilton's poem are not only seen as less than human, which is why they're enslavable, but also as displaceable. And so I want to think about how ideas about blackness and ideas about whiteness shape how planning operates. And I think if we can do that, we can come much closer to the specificity of racism and come closer to locating racism at the very core of the way that planning operates. One way that I try to do this analysis in the book is to look at the founding of modern professional planning in Halifax and across North America. Now, modern planning emerged in North America in the 1900s with a set of sort of disparate, disconnected planning interventions. And then by the 1910s, it became a coherent planning program, the basis of professional training, the establishment of planning departments, etc. In this era, planning was most often done not by people who had the title planner, but by a range of other actors, including public health doctors, philanthropists and voluntary organizations, engineers, architects, lawyers, political economists, and elected officials. It involved a range of new forms of knowledge, including health statistics, property assessment data, housing surveys, citizens' testimony at public health board meetings, and newspaper exposés. Finally, it involved intervention in the lives and spaces of the city, interventions that I would place in three categories. The first category were a set of interventions concerned with public health, in particular the prevention of infectious diseases. Important interventions here included the building of sewers and water mains, the establishment of building codes and inspections, and the establishment of land use zones, the distinctions between the use of land for commercial, residential, and industrial purposes. A second set of interventions were concerned with what could be called contentment, what planners called at the time convenience, or simply well-being. Here we can talk about interventions that include street and sidewalk paving, the installation of streetlights, and the creation of fancy boulevards and public parks. The last set of interventions were concerned with what was called the economic or efficient use of land, governing what gets put on the land. Here are some important interventions included the taxation of the heavier taxes on land that's either vacant or not used very heavily. Land use zoning again, which was meant to protect high-value residential property values. And the expropriation of land that was judged to be either used vacant, unused, or not using the land well enough. What united all of these interventions was a concern with human life, and an intention to make that life better in various ways. And so that union provided the basis of a relatively coherent planning program by the 1910s. And so Francis Doane, Halifax's first bona fide urban planner, said in 1915, quote, "The health of the people is planning's first care, convenience next," end quote. Now, in practice, this concern with the multifaceted character of life had certain limits, and those limits were incredibly visible in the community of Africville, as many of you know. And so in Africville, then a 300-person all-African Nova Scotia community on the northern tip of the Halifax Peninsula, all of the positive interventions the planning was making to improve people's lives elsewhere were not made. A whole series of interventions were made, moreover, that made life in Africville worse. And many of those negative interventions in Africville were actually meant to improve life in the city, the life of people elsewhere. And so, for example, health impairing industrial and medical facilities were moved from white neighborhoods to Africville in order to improve public health. And in 1915, the same year that Francis Doane told us all what urban planning was about, the city unveiled its first plan to expropriate and redevelop all of Africville in order to improve the economic life of the city. And none of this is surprising when we look at the way that human life was conceived by European and European descended countries in modernity, and in the specific context in which planning is getting formulated. It's seldom noted that modern professional planning was formed at the absolute height of scientific racism in Canada, the United States, and Western Europe. By scientific racism, I mean a vision of the population where people of color are not just viewed as inferior in some way, but as a kind of polluting presence that holds the whole population or the nation back. And so planning, concerned with human life defined in this way, implemented a whole series of interventions that were meant to improve and proliferate wildlife, and only wildlife. And so planning effectively put the urban terrain in the service of wildlife, producing a series of improvements in wet health, wet convenience, and wet prosperity, alongside and through the creation of black vulnerability, ill health, and sometimes death. So everything that planning did in the 1910s in Africa was consistent with the mission of planning, its attempt to create a better life in a very racially constricted, in other words, racist conception of what life entails. And this is indeed a form of racial oppression, to get back to my question about distinguishing racial oppression from class. There was a plan to expropriate and redevelop a poor white neighborhood just a few years before the first plan to redevelop Africa. It was an area known as the Upper Streets. This plan too involved coercion and oppression. It was going to remove people from their homes, and they were not asked whether they wanted to be. But it had an end, which was to make people's lives better by putting them in a set of model tenements that were supposed to improve their health, improve their well-being. It's coercive and it's oppressive, but it's a different kind. So this, I think, is the difference between class and racial oppression in this moment. It's the difference between a kind of benevolent oppression, in the case of the Upper Streets, and a malevolent oppression in the case of Africa. It's the difference between seeing lives that's kind of degraded but improvable, and lives that we just write off entirely. And so this is one racial logic present at the very founding of modern planning that has never really been uprooted, and it absolutely needs to. The second in the book is to try to show how racism operates across the entire urban terrain and affects the entirety of the urban experience. And here again, I think planning discussions don't quite get at this. For one thing, when planning discussions are interested in racism, they tend to look at particular neighborhoods inhabited by black people or people of color. They don't think it's the ubiquity of anti-blackness. How can we spot anti-blackness or the anti-black racism in every inch and every facet of the urban experience? These questions, again, are not raised just by a critical reading of planning literature or critical observations of George Eliot Clark. Clark, in a 2001 interview, says, quote, "Nova Scotia has this great, beautiful landscape, but behind it, or beneath it, is this incredible history of sometimes great pain and tragedy," end quote. And so this passage seems to me to suggest the necessity of looking beyond the great, beautiful landscape, looking beyond spaces that make us feel good, and thinking about what's on the underside, and how perhaps there's a great kind of pain and tragedy that is not just sort of hidden from view, but that actually helps to make the great beautiful landscape itself. So one way to think about, this, the way that racism is shaping white lives and spaces, and the way it's shaping a whole set of experiences, feelings, in our bodies, is to look at planning as efforts to create a more enjoyable city. Now, efforts to create a more enjoyable city is now a sort of dominant planning objective. We can see that really centrally in the work, if we can call it that, of Richard Florida. Now, Richard Florida is the subject of address him in the last chapter of the book. I also try to address his influence on the HRM by design planning that is in the present, and the problems with HRM by design. So an interest in urban enjoyment began to emerge really formatively in the 1960s. Its proponents in this context were heritage activists, neighborhood associations, retail business associations, pro-heritage property developers, and new planning authorities. Involved new kinds of theories of the knowledge economy, theories of urban design, maps of building heights, and photos of architectural character, activist bulletins and posters, and oral input to various public consultations around planning. Finally, it involved a new set of interventions, including the establishment of heritage protections, the renovation of old buildings, the establishment of limits on new building heights, creation of pedestrian walkways, and the reining in, to some extent, of car-focused transportation. One of the most important proponents of an enjoyment-focused vision of urban planning was a short-lived institution called the Nova Scotia Planning Secretariat. The Secretariat was a federal institution that paradoxically was focused on fostering economic development at the provincial scale in Nova Scotia. And what the Nova Scotia Planning Secretariat quickly decided was that first world economies were in the midst of a transition from industrial sectors towards post-industrial, knowledge-based or service-based industries. And this turned out to be true. They also concluded that if the Maritimes, or if Nova Scotia and Halifax in particular, were going to develop these knowledge-based industries, then a new form of planning was going to be needed in Halifax that would help to please draw in and retain the highly educated knowledge workers that these industries would require. Of course, this sounds a lot like Florida's idea later on, as well as the economic planning work of the Great Halifax Partnership. Another important proponent of this view was a social movement alliance called Movement for Citizens' Voice and Action, or MOVE. The MOVE was essentially an alliance of existing activist groups in the city. Its main purpose was to support the work of existing organizations. But it did also launch one common campaign that tried to draw the energies of all these organizations together, and that was in a campaign to stop Harvard Drive, or Harvard Drive North. It would have displaced about 180 families, working class families, just north of the downtown along the way, and it would channel a whole bunch of car traffic into the downtown, and therefore the kind of experience that activists were hoping to preserve in the downtown. And so this last concern, a concern with how the downtown was experienced, was very important to MOVE's campaign against Harvard Drive. And so in one important document, they wrote, quote, "In the past, the downtown was conceived of only as a commercial and financial center, while the residential areas of the city were removed to the suburbs. In the 1970s, however, the downtown area is thought of as a place to live, work, and enjoy ourselves on a 24-hour basis." So MOVE eventually wins this campaign, and the highway is never built. And I think this is a really good thing. It also kind of cements this vision that the downtown should be a place to enjoy oneself, to live or enjoy oneself in a way that we can see carries into the present. And so because of the importance of MOVE for establishing that sort of view of the downtown, I want to take a second to think about some of the limits to that vision of the downtown. And so, unnoticed in MOVE's sort of description of the downtown as a place to live, work, and enjoy oneself were the particular social limits to the downtown experience. And so in the previous decade, 2,000 poor working class displaced from the downtown project that became Social Square. Black activists at the time also highlighted the Halifax downtown is the most intense site of racial discrimination among landlords, employers, and just everyday businesses. As important African Nova Scotian activist Buddy Day said in 1969, quote, "As in Alabama, color lines are drawn in Halifax. These ones, however, are quietly enforced," end quote. They weren't always quietly enforced. And so we have a familiar problem here, which is a vision of how the city's going to be better, that kind of assumes that everyone experiences the city in the same way. And so the human being who lives, works, and enjoys the downtown is clearly not a poor person who has been displaced, and is absolutely not a black person who might have been displaced and is also facing racial discrimination. So at best, this vision of an enjoyable downtown combines the benefits of enjoyment to a particular subset of people who can already live, work, and enjoy themselves in the downtown. It also forecloses attention to a whole set of actions that could have been taken to make the downtown more enjoyable for everyone, including constructing affordable housing or addressing racial discrimination amongst downtown landlords and businesses. At worst, I think this conception of enjoyment actually licenses ongoing forms of displacement by tying people's conception of enjoyment to a very restricted space. And so enjoyment appears here where poor people and black people are not. What happens then when black people or poor people arrive? It seems to me that this limited conception of enjoyment has something to do with the reason that there are occasionally racial conflicts over the downtown, which inevitably emerge famously when black people appear where they're not expected to appear by white people, and maybe disrupt a kind of experience that white people were expecting to receive. And so if we think about that, I think it behooves white people to think about where our sense of enjoyment arrives, think deeply kinds of spaces we find enjoyable, and to be very critical when planning appeals to our sense of enjoyment without explaining the specific measures that are going to be taken to remove existing obstacles or barriers to the use of a particular urban space. And if we do that, I think we might learn to feel and enjoy ourselves differently. And we also might be able to see the work of people like Richard Florida and the HRM Design in a new light. And so HRM Design mobilized many of the same ideas as the Harvard Drive campaign, including the objective to make the downtown more lively and vibrant. And at no point in the process did it seriously talk about removing barriers to living, working, and enjoying myself in the downtown, including, again, addressing racial discrimination and building affordable housing. And the recent discussion of the Cogswell district has many of the same problems. I think we need to do a lot better than that. The final aim of the book is to think about how planning could operate otherwise. And here again, I think planning discussions aren't as helpful as they could be, mostly because these histories of planning often focus on white-led activist movements, including the movements led by Jane Jacobs, and sort of sideline a whole set of black-led movements, and don't think about those as being planning struggles. So sometimes, for example, black-led movements are categorized as civil rights movements, as black power movements, as environmental justice movements, which is fine, but all of those movements are also concerned with planning. And if we look at the way that some of those movements are fighting against urban planning and maybe envisioning a different kind of planning future, I think we can learn a lot about how to create an integrated city. And so the question here is, how can we recognize the planning future articulated by the history and present of Black struggle, even movements that don't frame themselves as planning movements? How can we uproot the whiteness of planning history by centering Black struggle and different conceptions of planning that these movements embody? Here again, obviously, this is kind of my starting point of doing this project, right? Is thinking about the long history of Black struggle and the better world that being. And so obviously, there's a whole lot of really important activists, some of whom are here tonight, including Rocky Jones and Carrie Best on this slide. It's the most well-known, and I do give this talk that's at Halifax to try to highlight some of those folks. This history of struggle, as many of you know, is a history of escaping slavery, escaping re-enslavement, which was a thing in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, fighting attempts to steal Black, fighting against segregated schools and social services, fighting for essential services like schools, churches, water, sewers, roads, recreational equipment, and fighting against displacement. One of the most powerful African Nova Scotian confrontations with planning occurred in the early life of an organization called the Black United Front. The Black United Front, as some of you know, was formed in 1968 by high-profile visits to the city by American and Caribbean Black activists, including Stokely Carmichael, Marion Makaba, Rosie Douglas, and 2 members of the Black Panther Party. During the second visit to the city of these activists, a quote-unquote Black family meeting was held in North Branch Library. 400 people attended. White politicians, leaders, and the media were kept at bay. At the end of the meeting, a decision was created to create a group that was eventually called the Black United Front. The Black United Front necessarily carried forward a very long history of Black struggle in Halifax and Nova Scotia, but differed from past efforts in 2 major ways. First, its leadership and membership would be entirely Black. Second, its focus would be on the attainment of Black self-determination. Black self-determination was an important goal for a range of movements in decolonizing countries of Africa and Caribbean, as well as various Black power, Black liberation, and civil rights groups in Western Europe and Canada. In essence, the essence of Black self-determination was helpfully articulated by Jules Oliver, who was the first president of the Black United Front, who said, Black people will no longer adhere to a system that is averse to racial injustice. The system would either be transformed, or Black people would create their own system. He says, quote, your white system can function as you wish. Black people will function as we wish, end quote. Now, the Black United Front was most effective in the years between 1969, where concerns in this period were generally described as housing, education, and employment. But it also involved a really important struggle for urban planning, and that struggle took at least 2 forms. The first is it confronted and challenged dominant institutions. So, for example, it It challenged racist hiring decisions at City Hall, including the planning department. It documented and criticized the lack of services and infrastructure in Black communities in the HRM and across the province. It directly challenged racist landlords and employers. It challenged racist federal and municipal housing policies, and it called for the removal of white planning consultants from certain Black communities where they were exerting too much influence and not letting people speak. The second kind of intervention that was important for the Black Community Fund involved the creation of alternative social programs. So here we can talk about its creation of community-specific leads that would oversee the development of recreational infrastructure in Black communities. It also trained to do housing surveys to examine the state of housing themselves rather than having outsiders come in. It created community-managed housing in many communities, and it created a series of programs to advance Black political consciousness, analysis, and organizing skills. In all of this work, the Black United Front imagined human life in a way that's entirely foreign to racist modern planning. Its very commitment to Black life was a departure from modern planning. So whereas modern planning tended to displace Blackness in order to focus on a more restricted conception of what life meant, the Black United Front would center Black life. And it believed that a better future was both possible and definable by Black people themselves. In some of these cases, the Black United Front was just fighting to have existing planning interventions, services, and infrastructure extended to Black communities, which is really important. In some of its interventions, however, it even goes even further and kind of provides a different definition of what planning can be. So, for example, in one moment, it used federal subsidies for the creation of affordable housing to buy materials for housing, but then used voluntary labor in Black communities to construct homes. And so, on a sort of a financial level, the result was the creation of much more housing for the same amount of money. But more deeply, it also affirmed the principle of Black mutual aid and self-help and community that has long been at the heart of Black community making across Nova Scotia. And so sort of begins to point toward a rather different way of thinking about what planning can be. So these experiments in doing planning differently basically came to an end in 1974, although the Black United Front existed until 1996. I explore some of the reasons for that in the book, but most of them are various forms of state repression. Its example is nevertheless important, both because it shows that planning can operate rather differently, rather than displacing Blackness. It can move Black life to the center, and it can articulate a kind of different principle of what planning should be doing, which is centering and enhancing Black self-determination. I think a focus on Black can help us to look differently at some more recent projects and initiatives in Halifax. The Halifax Regional Plan. Nova Scotians around the HRM to participate in planning processes. And our plan also resulted in significant investments in infrastructure, transportation, parks. None of that was located in African Nova Scotia. And it also established new limits on African Nova Scotians' use of their own land, including creation of subdivision of their property in order to house family members. And so, to me, the regional plan is entirely illegitimate, and not just because it carries forward rather than interrupting several centuries of racial injustice, but also because it violates the city's own policies, which in various places have established the principle of Black self-determination as a priority when planning deals with Black communities, and violates this policy. Intense links between planning power and race have shaped the lives and spaces of Haligonians in the 20th century. Planning in this period took human life as its starting point. It involved assessments of human life, its condition, and spatial conditions. It aimed to create improvements in human health, happiness, and prosperity, and it tried to achieve all of that through interventions in space. Throughout this history, however, Blackness marked the outside of the sphere of life that planning sought to improve. Efforts to improve life were not made in Black communities, and various planning interventions were made that worsened life in Black communities in order sometimes to improve white life. And of course, This book, while it's focused on the 20th century, it comes up in 2000. It's meant to continue right into the present. So in 2018, we're not outside the history that this book is trying to analyze. And we can all learn from this history, and especially from the efforts of groups like the Black United Front and present organizations like the One North End Project, the work that Lamia is doing in Preston, the work that is happening in Beachville, activist struggles in Upper Hamilton Plain, a whole range of struggles that are trying to transform planning, often by centering the principle of Black self-determination. And in all of this work, I think, we see a model of how planning can be different and how we can make it a better city, not just for Black communities, people of color, and Indigenous people, but I think they're actually describing a city that we should all want to live in. I don't think any of us wants to live in a city shaped as profound by racism. And so I think there's a model there on how we can live better. So I want to finish with a brief passage from the conclusion. In practical terms, groups like the Black United Front and contemporary groups like Black Lives Matter call for political authorities to cede the human and physical terrain they have claimed. They seek to end the ongoing process through which powerful institutions simultaneously assume jurisdiction over Black lives on the one hand and evict these lives from any desirable future on the other. For planning to heed these calls would be moving immediately to redistribute existing authority and resources. This would involve, at a minimum, vesting decision-making authority, diverting planning-related monies and technical expertise towards Black decision-making processes, and treating as illegitimate any municipal decision not made by Black people that significantly affects their lives. Actions like these, when they're demanded by Black activists, need to be supported by non-Black allies. What these groups teach more broadly is an obstruction to social transformation, even when its preservation is pursued within a social movement that also affirms non-white lives and interests. A different future requires white people to support and indeed prioritize others' interests. But it also requires something more than that. It requires them, it requires me, to leave our place within the boundaries of a conception of life that is always dependent for its coherence on the displacement and dehumanization of others. It requires us to refuse the ostensibly better life that planning and other institutions have offered us at enormous expense to others. The benefits of this life have never been and can never be universally distributed. They are premised to be violently defended. For white people to act against anti-Blackness or anti-Black racism, as Christina Sharp suggests, is to voluntarily leave the terrain of recognized humanity. Quote, one must be willing to need more Sharp rights. One must outside. On the outside, a place that Sharp notes some of us have never had any choice but to inhabit. An entirely different and genuinely better form of life might be created. A new form of urban planning, one released from its centuries-old connection to race and power, will be created here or nowhere. Thank you very much.
I was saying maybe we can just sit down. That's cool. Are you guys okay with that? Like, is conversation happening from here? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of in this space of wondering how y'all are feeling after hearing that. It's a lot. And I think, which is great, because I think that, the space that we're holding it together. And I just kind of wanted to bring in a feeling of just how present these conversations are and how much they are a part of our lives. Like just thinking about our city and this building and who individually we are all here and what we're bringing to this space. And just like in some ways really thinking about who we are as people who are gathered here today. And so I think that, I'm wanting to name specifically how I'm entering into this conversation, because I find that's really helpful for me when I hear all this heavy, deep ancestral memory that's coming being present in all of what I'm learning about myself in these conversations, right? Like, and all of what I've learned about Ted and just how we're learning from each other. And so I feel like I kind of talk from a popular education model, which means like, what is the collective wisdom in the world? Like, how can we kind of bring that together so that we can actually learn and digest and different for everybody. So I kind of want to let you guys in on that process a little bit for me, that I'm just processing and kind of these conversations about planning in a way that is new to me. And I kind of wanted to say that I'm entering that space with a commitment to work and a commitment to love. And I think that I had to kind of name that commitment to love because that's really what's going to require for us to be able to work through all of these complicated issues. And I know that in my work and in my life, I'm committed to that love. And I'm committed to seeing humanity in a way that represents love. And so these conversations about planning, these conversations about what has happened to Black folks and how we've been displaced and moved around and what we're going through right now, like all of that pain and all of that stuff I'm trying to unpack, there's also a deep amount of love that is wrapped around that. And I need to say that because I need to know that we are loving each other and trying to work through the complexities of these issues and all of this hatred and all of this violence that has been inflicted on us in our bodies. That centering, you have to find your center in that. And so I'm kind of trying to articulate what my center in the process has been. Because I really think that we have to do that. We have to do that work of trying to figure out what is it that's hitting me here. It's like what all of what Ted's presented today, what's happening. And so I encourage you folks today as we kind of enter the conversation in this space to kind of go here a little bit. Because we need more space to look at that space, I think. So I just wanted to say that. And so as I'm thinking about these conversations and thinking about the deep history, I'm kind of thinking about the values that we hold as Nova Scotians about this place and who we are. And I'm thinking often about the stories, the vast stories, and the different stories about people who have been here, the ancestral ways in which people built and moved around in this space, the stories about people who are just arriving to this space. Like there's so many different stories that are existing in this space. And so I think that planning actually is a big, like we have an opportunity with planning to actually kind of answer about how we have to live in this conversation about and friendship and love. I think planning actually kind of can do that. And so I think that I'm kind of excited about some of the work that I've been involved with. Conversations are keeping my interest a little bit. Should I go to planning school? Like I always, if you guys know me, I'm always thinking about what I should do next. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I actually do, but I'm really interested in these conversations about planning because I'm like, to really be able to kind of tangibly design ways to be together. The way that we look at our infrastructure and places. Design for that. So I'm super excited about where these conversations might take us. I'm super excited that we are naming publicly. But I read like that because like whatever I'm kind of like, I'm going to say, oh, I want to read this. And I think that we have to, this book is so dense and it's also a whole bunch of like labor that goes around with having to relive a lot of this. And that's kind of like some of the conversations that I have with Black women all the time. It's like the extra work that we have to do to be able to grapple with some of these issues when folks are talking about us, our bodies, and how we've been through the history and the legacies that happened to us. Like, it's hard. So I've been kind of picking away at the book and different parts have been speaking to me at different times. I was in a conversation and all of what you presented in the book. And I had heard about the Black United Front, like, through various different, things about my history, like, throughout my time, but this Black owned and Black run, that this is my mind. Like, I am self-determined and I'm continuously working every day to be that. And how do we actually
look at that as that being within our bodies and understanding then how vulnerable it makes me feel sometimes when I walk outside and like that I may just take it out someday or that I'm not safe. You know what I mean? So I think as Black people, we often carry this thing around. I am a target today of somebody's hate, somebody's violence because of the fact that I am a self-determined person. Like I think that is a deep question, and I think that that's what our ancestors fought for. Like I know that for everybody did, all those was so proud to see Ronnie and I up here talking about this because this is exactly what they fought for. They planted these seeds like so that we can pick them up and so I just think about just how amazing it is to kind of be present and how I don't take for granted any moment that I have to speak and that you folks are listening to me right now because I don't know when I'm going to go. And I don't know what my voice is going to inspire you, but I think that there's something about speaking from a self-determined place that I really hope and actually for us to make decisions about what we're going to do different. Because that's really what it comes down to, what are we going to do different? And what am I doing different every day to make sure that the future imagine what and that I actually have to work every day. I mean, that and a little bit of, there's a lot of work that happens, there's a lot of work that happens, there's a lot of discussions that happen, there's a lot of connections that are made. And I kind of just wanted to today, like, bring all of that into this space. And so like, we can just take that but that we are starting, you know, like what we're doing right now is continuing to step into, we're just kind of stepping, like taking our stuff on the path in terms of like trying to wrap it up. But there's something that I've been thinking about that I want to even articulate. It's like, I think Black people, in some way, we are in a space where regardless of whether it's to change across the board or in some ways tweak it to make our lives like a harder, fairer system, like we're actually setting up things and doing work for ourselves. You know what I mean? In some ways, and so I think that all of that work that happens in the Black community that is excluded or not a part of mainstream or accessible, like that's what it's really there's some people who are really working to build, and there's people who are working to make it accessible. And so I think every day we're in this space of having to make decisions about I'm in a place of having to make decisions about who I'll work with and what I'll do. Because I'm not interested in that they want to do things different but not. You know what I mean? That's all becoming much more clear. I think as you start to kind of walk more in your passion and in your purpose, you kind of see more clearly who's actually about doing stuff. And so that's kind of, and then Halifax is not a big city in the sense that we won't be able to kind of pinpoint when we're seeing progress and change. You know what I mean? So I think that that's kind of one of the cool things that we get to, that one of the advantages that we get in this city is that we get to be able to pinpoint sometimes where that change happens. What is that big project or that work, like what is the one we're then doing and then ultimately what changes it? Like we can track the path of all that stuff. So I think that that's kind of really cool and where we're at now, we're picking up pieces from like what was done before us. And we're adding to that. And there was one other, I wanted to kind of tell you guys about what work I'm doing. I'm not talking about what it is that I do. Just in my feelings. So these guys. Yeah, one of the notes I wrote down there is like our children indeed grow up to be planners. Like, wouldn't that be kind of cool? Developers designing a city that is for all bodies. And for animals too, because I really love animals. Yeah, the Black controlled institution is within me. Yeah, I love that. When I got to that piece of that, that's what I'm like, I'm not Black controlled institution. That feels good to me. And so I'm from North Preston, and so North Preston is it was on the map there. It's kind of on the outskirts of Halifax, but and every time I talk about this, like, what can I say about this? But we're really special people. I mean, it's geographically, I guess, like in some ways, in the country, outside of Halifax. And so I kind of do this thing of going back and forth. I was also raised in Dartmouth, so I kind of have this Dartmouth-Preston connection, like for like 25 years. And I'm schools and stuff like that. So I obviously talk about that decision being really crucial in my life because my mom made the decision to move me from my Preston to be able to kind of benefit from all of the things that were in Dartmouth for me. And I talk about this going back and forth all the time because I moved back to Preston more recently, and I'm still doing this back and forth, but like I'm just spending much more time in Preston, and I'm trying but then also my love and my heart for UNIAC and all the work that I'm doing in one project, and the North End, like I think Bobby District particularly is one of the areas where we really have a lot of opportunity to kind of think about planning in a really tangible way. And so I'm kind of, in some ways, as I essentially started a consulting company called Community Connects, because I needed something that was allowing me to move and do different things. Like I kind of came up under a group of consultants and kind of learned that you can get paid for, talking and like standing around a room and sharing insight from a place of your expertise. You know what I mean? So when I learned that, I was like, oh, I can. And I felt like, there was a whole lot of folks that were speaking about African and social people. So I kind of really wanted to focus my work on that. And when I said connect, I spelled it KINNECTS because I really wanted to talk about this kinship that exists between people. And I really wanted to be able to highlight this thing called connected leadership. Because I really do believe that we can really answer any complex problem if we are committed to each other and we kind of look at our relationships as family relationships. And that we can actually work through hard stuff if we consider each other family. And so when I talk about, my connects, these are people that I'm working with that I love and our families, I look to like as I work with. And so all of that work has really led me to kind of be in the space of doing community engagement in a really diverse way. And so that work sees me being in North Preston and UNIAC and Dartmouth and all kinds of other communities and spaces and Toronto and other places as well. So I'm just really thankful to be able to kind of be in work, and it's a privilege really to kind of be in work that allows me to see the patterns across different spatial domains and different groups of people and stuff like that. And so I'm really happy and thankful for the communities that have allowed me to be in their communities and to be able to work with them and serve essentially. And all of what I learned and all of that echoes within my body. And as I kind of embark on this thing of trying to become a storyteller, because I really want to kind of share the stories and the narratives about people that I've seen across the journey and all the places where I found them. And so that's kind of some of the other piece of what I'm getting into these days of kind of trying to work on, becoming a storyteller and really trying to share some of these narratives that I'm hearing. And that's it.
Thank you, Leah. We definitely always every time Leah speaks, she strikes a chord in me that just, really brings up those emotions in a way that, stimulates my mind. And thank you, Ted, for establishing the long system here in Halifax and being able to, put that in an African young man where it's, highly respected and credited. Actually leads into, the place where we get to establish, credibility for the work that we do and going out there and trying to engage our communities in meaningful ways. So, funny enough, I remember the first conversation, and what I'll say is the dynamics of the room were whitewashed, quite frankly. And there were very few black people in the room, and I was one of the few. And I was blown away by that because we're talking about, urban planning in our community at a time where gentrification is a for real thing. And when we talk about gentrification being a real thing, growing up in the north end of Halifax, born and raised, I will say born and raised. You know, it gave me a level of power that said that, you know, I need to grab this conversation and take it back to my community so that more people can understand what's going on, because, you know, a conversation that's really real for us as African Nova Scotians is the displacement conversation. You know, Ted mentioned, you know, the Africville piece there, which is black eye, as far as I'm considered, for not only Nova Scotia but for Canada, as it's currently being used on the world platform when we talk about, you know, discrimination here in our country and specifically in our province. So what we need to understand is that a lot of folk that were displaced from that community were displaced to what was known as either Mulgrave Park or the Union Square. So for many people, you know, when you hear either one of those communities, it's usually trailed by some negative connotations that, you know, have been embarked on us through media. So media plays a huge role in these conversations and is establishing certain stigmas and stereotypes that really don't allow us to move these conversations forward in a meaningful way. And that was one of the reasons why, you know, me and a couple other folks got together and decided to do the One North End community engagement. It's now rolled up to be the One North End Community Economic Development Society, because we needed to establish some type of grounds and we registered as a nonprofit organization based on some of those engagements we had and what we were hearing, to make sure people knew that we were very serious about these conversations. And although that they're time consuming, it's because the work we're doing is very important and very meaningful to us, and it's not something that we're going to rush for nobody. So, you know, it came about literally from a CBC article that labeled our community as the two North Ends. And that's not, you know, how we wanted to frame the conversation. Hence the reason why we changed the whole conversation to the one. And literally the vision is the name. We believe our community can come together as one, and that if we engage in a meaningful way, that we can look at this new influx of residents that are coming into our community. And I say our community because we've been here a long time, and not only have we been here a long time, we were displaced here from a place where we were once, you know, owners of our land, to now being living in a colonized community where, you know, we're paying rent, and at the same time, you know, we got young men and women willing to die for, you know, that neighborhood that, you know, their mama's renting. Jay-Z would say, you may know that, but some of you may not either. But at the end of the day, I gotta stay true to my roots. And staying true to my roots, these are, you know, some of the things that remind me of the work that we do in carrying this forward. Funny enough, that when I was in that conversation, and I said to Ted when we spoke today, by the way, you know, I also got to say that I'm very happy to be here and not be scripted, right? Because in many cases, you know, we don't get these platforms to be able to speak and not be scripted before, you know, we come into so when I spoke to Ted today, I explained to him, well, Ted, I think you need to know that your work inspired us to get together and really answer, you know, the question, and how can we get attached to this conversation? Because in seeing a room full of white people, many of them which would be new residents in my community, I felt they had an appetite for a conversation and they wanted to hear from some of the long-withstanding residents. So for us, it was extremely important to be able to pull these our community together and really drive the agenda to, you know, really make sure that when we talk about the economic influx, that, you know, that everybody in the community gets the benefit from this opportunity, What are some of those issues that are hindering the success of, our lower income residents, which are predominantly Black African Nova Scotians? So we need to be able to answer those questions and what's hindering that success and how can we, support and really how can we solve those issues and move forward with some of this, economic influx that's coming into our community. So I see this as an opportunity to really indulge in some real conversation. And I know that we're really short for time here, and I really want to open it up to the audience because I appreciate you guys making the choice to be here tonight. That's one of the things that we have to understand is that we all had the choice to be here and not be here, and it's really important that we open up the floor and allow you to ask any questions that you have on your mind. And one of the things I will clear up, I do work for an organization called Common Good Solutions. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'm here today to support the One North End Community Economic Development Society, which also has been supported by my employer because they gave me the time and ability to work off the side of my desk and make sure that I can continue to have these conversations and hearing forward. So the one thing that we did as a group was we wanted to establish that for sure that those changes haven't become, and we wanted to make sure that our youth were tied into these conversations and they were going to grow with these conversations because at the end of the day, I don't think this conversation is going to end in the right people. And that day when Ted was having that conversation, that was a new conversation for me. So to be able to reach out to the media who was involved in this type of work as far as community engagement and reaching out to, who is now our counselor, Lindell, at the time not our counselor when he was a part of the One North End engagement group, but just wanting to make sure that our youth, because he was working at the library as a youth programmer, but just making sure our youth are being tied into that conversation. So, I think it's extremely important that we carry this work forward and not only carry the work forward, but the voices that we've been engaging forward, because at the end of the day, it's extremely important that we stay true to the work that it is we're doing. So on that note, I'll open up the floor to you all, and thanks again for coming out. We greatly appreciate it, and don't be shy.
All right, folks, and I will come around with the mic. I want to apologize to Rodney. I had it right in my notes and I misspoke. Sorry. I'm good. And thanks again to Rodney, to Linnea, and to Ted for giving such excellent talks.
I just want to thank Ted. You've written a wonderful book. And I just want to make people aware that we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of the November 30th, 1960 meeting where the Blackness was formed at the North Branch Library. I just want to make people aware there is actually going to be an event at the North Branch Library to actually commemorate the 50th anniversary. It's in the planning process. The North Branch Library normally closes at 5 p.m. on Fridays. It's going to stay open longer for that event. So and it's a historic event. And I just want to commend you that. Rodney, I had the same experience sitting at a cafe on Ballajun Street, because I was part of the tail end of the 1991 riot that actually took place, the so-called riot. And I was sat there enjoying a tea and enjoying a nice French pastry, but at the same time feeling, the dispossession of the community. So as George L. Clark likes to say, Nova Scotia is beautiful, but I like to describe it as a grotesque beauty. But one point I want to have, you wrote an excellent chapter in the Blackness at the front. But I think, and I don't know if you decided that you didn't want to be critical, but there is a tension there, because a tension between political determination, self-determination, and economic self-determination. And Rocky Jones, in his autobiography, talks about how the revolutionary roots and impetus for the Blackness at the front gets diluted, in fact, it gets completely destroyed by the intervention of state funding, right? So I think a very important point as well here in terms of the Black men at the front is the issue of how the state intervenes in Black struggles to co-opt them, to take them over, so that they no longer have that kind of mass democratic revolutionary impetus. And I think that's one of the lessons learned from the Black men at the front as well.
Anybody want to respond to that? Well, I'll run the mic over to you.
I also just, but I think in some ways, like, you can keep going. Like, that's why I kind of talked about me starting my own business and being an entrepreneur in that way was crucial, and that self-determined, self-control, Black control is me. You know what I mean? And so I think that a part of my work is actually to talk to young people about how do you become entrepreneurs, how do you kind of find ways to make money so that you can actually do the political work that you want to do as well. So I think that we're kind of thinking about that in some of our current conversations with young people about this movement and this work of like setting yourself up that you can work and do things to make money and sustain yourself.
Just to piggyback off of what Lamia was saying there, with the One North End Community Economic Development Society, that's what it's about. It's about creating opportunities for ourselves that will build that sustainability so that we don't have to worry about government coming in and interrupting the work that we're doing. In fact, we were very strategic with the type of funding that we would even take in to carry out the work that we were doing to engage our community. And we said that at the end of the day, we'll do it voluntarily if we have to, but we're not going to take very money. Plain and simple.
This conversation is extremely important to me, and I'll tell you why. I grew up in Uniacke Square. I left when I finished my first degree. I taught in the public elementary school there for 12 years until I was forced out myself, along with 2 other Black staff members. And I don't have the privilege of being able to say, or the good fortune of being able to say that my family is from a particular village in Italy, or from the city of Trinidad, or from Ghana, or wherever. I don't exactly know where my people hail from. I have a general idea that it's most likely West Africa. So my people came here by way of, or as a result of the Civil War in the United States. And my family was granted, my father's people. My father was born in North Preston, moved when he was 2 to a smaller Black community that no longer exists. My mother's people were granted land after the war of 1812 in Fall River, and that community no longer exists. So when people ask me where I'm from Uniacke Square. I'm from Square Town. I'm from Squizzy. This is, I have a lot at stake. I want to be able to physically be able to take my grandchildren. I want my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren to be able to visibly see the place where I'm from and not just hear stories or tales about this place. So I think it's really important for me that we continue to work on making sure that the African Nova Scotian presence continues to thrive in that part of the city. My mother's mother, my grandmother, Mama Burrow, she raised her family in the 20s on Maitland Street. And at that point there, there were the Days and the Adams family and the Smith family and the Downeys and the Lobies, and this was a very cohesive neighborhood, and it was one of the established Black neighborhoods. The 2 neighborhoods or communities that my parents hail from no longer exist. I don't want to see this happen in downtown Halifax or the inner city. So there are some people that have a lot at stake in making sure that our presence is visible and continues to thrive in this community. It's really important.
Thank you, Wendy.
I mean, quite honestly, you strike a chord there. Like I said, I'm born and raised in the community. Just the whole notion of Squizzy Square Town. That's you know, you forgot one U.S. posse. You go way back. Now come on. So you know, when we're talking about that, these are conversations that are real for us when we grow up in the Union Square. And you know, when we're talking about conversations that are real, we're talking about that displacement that can easily happen again, because we know that where we live, even though it's a low-income community, it's prime real estate. And when it's prime real estate, that means the developers are looking. And when money's involved in the conversation, let's not forget that at the end of the day, the way they traditionally do business is all about maximizing shareholder wealth. But, you know, at Common Good Solutions, we look at things a lot differently. We look at it from, you know, the people and the planet side of things. So, you know, it gives you a different mindset. And when we start tying into these conversations in the way where we can possibly build out some land trusts that will allow us to control our own assets within our community, then we're talking about that economic stability, which is extremely important to be able to put those safeguards up in place to make sure that, you know, you can't just come, you know, really remove us from our dwellings.
And I think too, just like thinking about the connections between like Preston and like just thinking about all of the people who married and like the Downies and that sort of class and the Prestons. So just like how we've all been connected across communities as well. And I think naming the communities that were no longer and bringing their memories back because of things that we need to know about those as well. And so I thank you for sharing that. But there's so many communities that we don't know their names anymore. So thinking those narratives present.
And there's one name that we missed, and I just want to mention it. And when we talk about the community, you know, the Prevosts. I remember a gentleman by the name of Graham Prevost. In our community, Graham was a staple. This man owned at least 9 homes between Creighton Street and Manor Street. And at the end of the day, many of them are no longer there, or they're bought up by, you know, new community members that have moved in and have no idea what they moved into. So, you know, this is a real conversation, and how Graham lost a lot of his homes is a whole nother conversation, right? Because we talk about some of that displacement stuff that Ted mentioned earlier, and you know, when you can put a letter up on somebody's home and tell them that if they don't, you know, spruce up, you're going to take their home away. I mean, that's an old conversation where we come from.
My name is Dennis Wright. For anybody who don't know me, probably a lot of you won't, but the developers do. I come from the land of Beachville. I heard earlier talked about having a target on your back. God's blessed me. I'm a fairly young man, but I've set up nonprofit organizations. I've watched them crumble. I've battled with developers on my own. I continue to do it. Quickly and briefly, I've been in the cemetery in the black community of Beachville and seen survey ribbons right around my ancestors, and it kind of turned me into a new man, and I promised my ancestors that I'd never give up this battle. So after a long 13-hour workday, to be here with Ted right now is honestly a blessing. I can say I know Ted for probably about 5 years now. The first time I heard him speak was in Dartmouth. It was the War of 1812. They had a thing that was over there to talk about it and for people to learn about it. So I had learned some of my ancestors may have came from this. So I just went there to see if I could make any connection. And when I heard Ted speak, it just changed me. It opened me up to new ways of thinking, and the way he was researching some of the things I was very passionate about, it kind of changed me. So mainly I just wanted to get the mic to just show Ted right now that I'm really proud of you. I think you deserve a round of applause if I can. I can personally attest to Ted's level of commitment. He's visited Halifax many times in the last 5 years. He's been to the community of Beachville. He's been around a lot of black communities in the city. I know this because I personally take him there, and I've seen and listened to the amount of interest he has, and just he's very passionate about it. So mainly, again, I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, and also just, if I could nip some of my experiences in one bud, for lack of better words, I would say to you tonight, like, by a show of hands, besides my good friend Lindell here, is there any city councilors or people that work for HRM here tonight? Could you stand up if you're here? I'm gonna stand up, I'm not on here, but I just wanna look and see how many. Okay, that's good to see. So we do have some people here that are interested as well, and that's a very good thing. That's a start to change. A lot of times when we're doing stuff like this, as we've learned and you can learn through PED's research, we don't really get the support of a lot of HRM planners. So you deserve a round of applause as well for being here tonight, I believe. And this is not to be taken disrespectful, or this is not geared at you at all, but I will wrap it up and say, in my past experiences, to anybody, if you're out there and you're trying to help out in the Black community and you're trying to build, I would just encourage you to have faith in each other. Love your brothers, love your sister. And I heard Rodney mention it earlier, doing like a little volunteer work. Sometimes like funding. We get all wrapped up in funding, money, and it eludes us and it makes us go in directions that we don't need to go. And a lot of times, people like developers or perhaps HRM or some of the bigger places, they're sending people in that look like us, they talk like us, they walk like us, they are our cousins, brothers, or sisters, but they're not there for our best interest. They're not there for our best benefit. And if you get that feeling, ride with it. Go with your gut feeling. That's why you have a gut feeling. So if you build one of these committees, that's my advice to you. Keep it inclusive until you know where you're exactly trying to go. And if you can stay inclusive, stay there.
Folks, I hate to do this, but I warned you that I was going to. I really want to let you keep talking to each other, but I'm just not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to invite you to come down here, and if you're dying to say something to our wonderful panelists tonight, please do. Please buy a book on your way out if you have the cash available, or for somebody else in your life. Stop by, get it signed. Otherwise, please, keep in mind the incredible staff we have here at the library and be nice to them and help me get us all out of here in time too. Thank you so much to Ted, to Leah, to Roger, for being on tonight. Thanks to you all for coming tonight, and we hope to see you again around these parts.